Genesis. This album I'm going to review is A Trick of the Tail, which came out in 1976. But let's go back a bit. The year previous, they embarked on a world tour promoting the double album, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And it was on that tour in Cleveland, apparently, that Peter Gabriel told the band he would be leaving at the end of the tour. And he basically said that he just wanted to move on and be totally in charge of the material, and that he had other pies to cook, so to speak. And so the band were then left to consider what happened next. Now, Steve Hackett went away and he recorded a solo album, The Voyage of the Acolyte. Very good album, actually. But after he concluded with that, there was a discussion about where the band were going, if they were going anywhere. And Collins came up with the idea that they ought to continue just as an instrumental band, but that was thrown out. And so eventually they started writing the tracks that became A Trick of the Tail, and young Collins was pushed to the forefront more as an experiment, really, to see how he would get on. And so he started to take over the vocals, and of course the rest of the band absolutely loved it. And so that was it. He was slotted in as the drummer and the vocalist, and they put together A Trick of the Tail. And this is my review of that 1976 album.
So the opening track from A Trick of the Tail. It's Dance on a Volcano, nearly 7 minutes of it. This first song that Genesis ever performed and wrote in the absence of Peter Gabriel, with Phil Collins on vocals. A jangling Hackett-like melody coupled with bombastic drumming slides into a hypnotic beat, lulling you before Phil's swift injection of vocals, with drums literally in hand as the melody rolls into gear. There's some driving Banks keyboards on here, and then there's the bridge with Banks again knitting things together with Rutherford's bass. There's a jazzy rhythm somewhat. It's a bit chaotic, but complex chord structures, and Phil sounds like Gabriel's brother, really. First recorded song ever, as I say, without PG, but it's a pretty competent effort. And then there is the pacey, extravagant next section, a frantic mix with chaos and calm fluctuating between. Banks very much to the fore, and then we glide to the outro. Lyrically, I think it's about being brave, perhaps a new band venture. Try to live your dreams. Don't be held back by others who are doubters. Could have been about Collins getting in front of the microphone. Phil taking risks, singing leading vocals, perhaps. Big challenges. Climbing a volcano, of course. Track 2 then is Entangled. It's very much like a relative of Nursery Crime, I thought. Quaint vocals, a melody that hints at tranquility, and the harmony is very sweet with chiming guitars. It's got a folky origin with that progressive feeling added on top. I always get a sense of medieval courtiers and harpsichords, and before it segues into track 3, it wails with a montage of keyboards and magnificent depth of sound, with a feel of courtyards, 18th century style. And then there's the synthesizer, such a mood creator, allowing you to imagine history and allow your imagination to sink into the sound. The synthesized solo at the end is very dreamlike. Lyrically, well, not too sure really. It's apparently written by Hackett. Mary Poppins-like, I guess. Fantasy. Track 3 is Squonk.
the first song that Colin sang when the album was recorded. Apparently, he was reluctant to take on the job of vocalist, but once he'd done this, the band wooed him, and so impressed were they with his effort on Squawk, and they convinced him to take over the job on all his songs. It's got a punchy rhythm with a floating midsection bridge, which neatly rejoins Banks and Rutherford's driving rhythms. Apparently, the midsection was influenced by Led Zeppelin's Cashier, but I couldn't see that. That's what Banks said anyway. It's a real foot-tapping piece, easily likeable, and has a very distinctive Genesis sound. Lyrically, Squawk apparently was a mythical creature dissolved in a pool of tears. That's the North American folklore, apparently. Don't know much else than that.
It's track 4 then, it's Mad Man Moon. Well, Phil really excels on this ballady, smoochy tune, with church-like organ to begin, adding a flute to the neat piano melody, and then about 2 minutes in, you get all that minstrel courtyard like feel, very Genesis style, and then it skips into a circus-like piano, tiptoeing into more heraldry, and then Banks excels on the synthesizer, which adds to the choral nature of the instrumentation. Then Phil finally rejoins as the pace hots up. It gets a comical mood through a Harold the Barrel-like vocal, but it's brief as the band rekindled by Banks to the choral majesty. There's some anthemic choruses on this track with keyboards arrangements that embody the production, the enriched production, and the clarity of this is excelled by the flute that fits in as we move to the outro. Lyrically, it starts off hinting at early love and a memory, and of the consequences of travel that lead to separation. And then there's a comment on weather, particularly in Newcastle is referenced, and the contrast in travelling afar to sun-drenched drought desert areas, and it seems to sort of suggest that this extremes of weather might well be a hint of problems further down the line. To track 5 then, Robbery, Assault and Battery. Some swirling keyboards lead us into a jaunty piece of criminal intent with a comic working class send-up. Collins sounding like that character Buster Edwards from that movie that he was in. A nice melody though, with a stabbing chord rhythm from Hackett, and then an extravagant free-form bass and keyboard duet, which suggests a touch of free-form jazz before the spiraling symphonic rock returns, before another nod to villainy from Collins, and then Banks dominating the soloing. Where is Hackett? Anyway, he's used very sparingly so far, but there's nice interwoven vocals at the end. The lyric, as suggested, is basically about a crime that goes a slightly wrong, a robbery of jewels and diamonds leads to the need to shoot a weapon, and then the culprit fleeing from the police as they close in, and it's all in a jocular style. Track 6 is Ripples. It's an 8-minute opus, and it's a peach. That medieval folklore, middle-aged feel, is how I see it, and it draws you in. However, the lyrics might suggest otherwise. Nice precision acoustic guitars mesh with the piano and Phil's voice, and the song builds to the chorus, which is a mightily impressive. Great vocals from Phil. And remember this line, the face that launched 1,000 ships. You historians will note that that was in relation to Helen of Troy back in Greek mythology. So maybe the sound is more of Greek empire, folk and lute. That's my image anyway, and as the sounds gently weave together, as the chorus swallows you up, and then the guitar fades and the synth sound swarms into the moulded guitar organ mix. The pace then quickens and then slows again. That cascading piano, the chamber-like music feel, and just close your eyes and listen to Hackett's work. It's very delicate and definitely a high point for him. Before that, grab hold of the chorus and it drives you subtly to the finish. It's an absolute gem. Lyrically, Ripples, well, it's definitely about aging. The ripple, of course, on the water becomes less and less the further away it goes, and this is the metaphor for the aging of life and the reduction in one's beauty. And then that reflection on Helen of Troy and the nod to early youth, particularly female beauty, but a preponderance to aging and that journey becoming a graceful decline, particularly in terms of how you physically look. That's what I reckon it's about anyway.
So to the title track then, A Trick of the Tail, written by Tony Banks and inspired by the novel The Intuition by William Golding. Now that name rings a bell to me. For those of you familiar with him, you'll know that he wrote the influential Lord of the Flies. We all learnt that at school, didn't we? And also Banks suggests that It's Getting Better, the song by the Beatles on Sgt. Pepper, was also an inspiration for this one. But most of us just come down on the fact that it's about an alien visiting Earth. Well, anyway, to the music. There's some quirky piano that leads us in, with a music hall type of beat, and vocals from Collins, absolutely superb, very uplifting tempo with a touch of vaudeville, and some quaint keyboard noises thrown in, some nice bass runs from Rutherford, and the keyboards once again very spacey with a flute-like sound. Maybe that was the mellotron towards the end. Well, to those lyrics then, many interpret the song as being about a boy having a loving family and leaving to explore pastures new, but his childhood memories retain the strength as he wearies of other places. Alternatively, some people think it might be a reference to Gabriel leaving the band. But I tend to go with the idea that it's about a creature exploring humanity and then escaping the excesses of the human selfishness. The finale then, it's an instrumental, Los Endos, 5.5 minutes, very spacey, very echoey. It's a combination of keyboards and guitars meshed together with some frantic percussion, and it's tied in with some pacey rhythm and Banks' wizardry, of course, with Collins' ferocious drum style, leads to a sort of bridge which could have sounded a bit like Yes, really, which glides into a thundering Rutherford bass riff before it bursts into life again and then recycles into a cosmic style crescendo of sound before knitting back into the opening sequence. It's a wonderful instrumental piece of symphony, not sympathy. And the closing beat hypnotizes your feet as you tap away. Of course, it's a reprise of Dance of the Inferno and Squawk thrown in there as well, but a fitting finale to a great album. I really loved this album, A Trick of the Tail, when it came out. I actually felt that it was the best thing since Nursery Crime at the time, although I hadn't really taken enough time out to listen to the epic Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. But certainly Collins having no problem slotting into that lead vocal role, and he tells a story with meticulous authority. And Banks, I think, really taking up the band up a notch. So a really great start to post Genesis with no Gabriel, I feel. Check it out. It's a beautiful set of songs.